This podcast was brought to you in association with Penguin Random House India, which has published Reading Sri Aurobindo to celebrate the 75th year of India's independence and Sri Aurobindo Ghosh's 150th birth anniversary. Hello and welcome back to the Kitabi Karwan podcast. In one of the last few episodes of this particular season, we have a very interesting book and series of editors for you. Today, we'll be talking with Gautam Chikermane and Devdip Ganguli, the editors of Reading Sri Aurobindo, a handbook to Sri Aurobindo Ghosh's voluminous writing, which covers the literary world, philosophy, politics, economy, and it is honestly a huge deep dive into the work of a person who, which very honestly, I, despite claiming myself to be an modern Indian history buff, was not aware of. Without giving much away, let's jump right into the interview and talk to Gautam and Devdeep about their experiences with Sri Aurobindo ji's work and why they particularly chose to go about doing this. Hello and welcome everyone to the Kitabi Karwan podcast. Today I have with us Gautam Chikermane and Devdip Ganguli, who've edited an absolutely fantastic book, which at this point of time I feel ashamed to admit that I did not know the depths of the person that they spoke about. That is, of course, Sri Aurobindo Ghosh. I, for one, prided myself in the fact that compared to most people, I do like enjoying uh, reading about Indian history and modern Indian history, particularly. And even though I knew about Sri Ghosh in a very, let's say, textbook kill manner, right? You the one that you know in school, and that's about it. That he was one of all your freedom fighters, and that he did move away from the movement into spirituality. The depths of his wisdom and his work, particularly in terms of the plays and poems and the vast text that he's produced, was something that was unknown to me. So, first of all, thank you for bringing this to us. And before I jump to the questions, I'll give both of you about, say, a minute, 30 seconds to a minute to just speak briefly about the book and let our audience know what this book is about.
Gautam, you want to go first?
No, you go first.
So this is a book where Sri Aurobindo wrote very vast, has left behind a very vast body of written work. So his complete works add up to 36 volumes. And so the idea of our book is to present these 36 volumes through the eyes of persons who have engaged with these volumes. So it's not a summary of the volumes. We are not trying to present all the ideas that are there, because that would be impossible. But it is a kind of an introduction or a reading that is done by each of these persons. So in addition to Gautam and me, there are 19 other persons who have written for our book, and we have selected these persons because they have a lot of engagement with their respective volumes. And so through this book, we hope that uh, people like you, Siddharth, your introduction is, you just hit the nail on the head. You are our audience. Persons like you who are well read, who have an interest in Indian history, in Indian culture, and in general, you're curious about the world. And you may have heard of Sri Aurobindo only in passing, but through this book, we hope that more and more persons will recognize and realize the extraordinary depth and vastness of his works and will be able to approach it directly.
That's actually a very. I'm so sorry. If you had anything to add, Gautam.
Yeah, I think Devdeep has expressed it very elegantly. It's about 6 million words, 21,000 pages. He said that, all our experts have engaged with one volume. But even that, I think, is stretching the term, because I have read all the volumes and I know that I haven't read any of the volumes. And that is because each of the chapters within a volume, let us say the strength of stillness, or on money, or on the powers of the mother, or the Uttarpara speech, anywhere, be it as political writings, philosophical writings, or spiritual writings. Even a single chapter can be an area of vast and deep study. And I say this not only in terms of the spirituality of Sri Aurobindo, but also just the intellectual explorations that I have seen being done around other philosophers, such as Kant, such as
Right.
Socrates, such
Right.
as Plato, such as any of the political philosophers, economic theorists. And I think even to say that uh, to read a book is also just the beginning, in my opinion. Once you assimilate it and once you start engaging with even one chapter, I hope our book becomes a bridge for you to read the primary readings, which is the main objective of our book. It's a
Agreed.
bridge. Once you start reading Sri Aurobindo in the original, you will yourself see the truth of what I'm trying to tell. The way in which he has explored Indian culture, Sanatan Dharma, global unity. Each of these is in itself a huge a field of work. And to that extent, our book is barely a drop in the ocean.
No, I completely agree with what you guys just said, because as I mentioned in my introduction, uh, I mean, as much as I'm aware that a lot of our freedom fighters and earlier political workers were their intellectual prowess knew no bounds. They did write a lot about the political work that they were bringing to the table. But for me, this was an eye opener I knew that he was, he set up the Aurobindo ashram and he moved towards spirituality post 1910. But that was the be all and end all of it. I had no idea of his literary prowess or of his philosophical prowess or what he writes about spirituality. And it's actually a very interesting way you put it, that it's a bridge to the primary readings that Sri Aurobindo's come up with. So what germinated the idea to make this bridge for I don't know, for readers? Was there a particular experience, or I don't know, what popped this idea in both of your heads?
A date. 15th August 2022 was the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo.
Okay.
In your introduction, you said you learnt about him in your textbook. I would like to see that textbook sometime, because in my readings, Sri Aurobindo has been cancelled. I
Oh.
did not read about Sri Aurobindo in any textbook.
Oh, wow.
I didn't see his work. I didn't see him as a freedom fighter. I saw him as a road, Aurobindo Marg, on which I would drive every day without knowing what Aurobindo was. By the way, there is no such thing as Aurobindo. The name is Sri Aurobindo, or in his political life, Aurobindo Ghosh.
Mhm.
Uh, so, uh, so the 150th birth anniversary, and for the past 20 years, I have been reading Sri Aurobindo every day, trying to get a grip on what I believe is the world's greatest philosopher, greatest rishi ever.
Mhm.
But then everybody has a right to her own opinion. That's my view. So when the 150th birth anniversary was coming, and I saw how Sri Aurobindo has been completely neglected by the political class, by the education institutions, by our entire education policy. And Sri Aurobindo is not alone. He is one of the several people who have been cancelled. Then I realized that maybe we should do some work, some adventure around his ideas. They are an adventure, by the way. Once you read it,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
will understand. So I thought, let me start by uh, trying to see how I can introduce this 36 volumes to an average reader. I
Right.
began the project and I realized it is beyond my capabilities.
Right.
I called Devdip. Devdip he teaches at the Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education in what is known as the Ashram School. He's a product of the ashram school. His parents were from the ashram school, so he's a third or fourth generation ashram school. He too has read a lot of Sri Aurobindo, and he teaches a lot of Sri Aurobindo's books. So I thought, let's get together. Between you and me, we'll be able to find some sort of a way to explore Sri Aurobindo. We realized this is beyond us again. Even two people can't do this. Hence, we called upon our experts, those whom we know have engaged with a particular book in a particular way. Some of them teach, some of them read, some of them practice across different spectrums. Some are
Mhm.
men, some are women, some are in India, some abroad. So we got a wide spectrum of people who have engaged with Sri Aurobindo's works over time. And we requested them to join us in this adventure. Thankfully, everybody said yes. And so we knew that this project had something going for it.
Right.
We outlined the process. This is the way to do it. So many codes, so many words, such and such. Many of them expressed the view that we can't write and compress an 800-page book into 2,000 words, but we said that needs to be done. So all together, we all came together and made this as an offering to Sri Aurobindo. Offering in the sense, not only in terms of a spiritual offering or a intellectual offering, but also in terms of like nobody's getting paid anything for it. All the money is going to the Sri Aurobindo ashram. We found a partner in Penguin, and I think that's the book behind you stands testimony to all our efforts.
Right. Right. I mean, and just to answer your question that you'd asked me about my textbooks, because I remember exactly how I remember Sri Aurobindo, and I feel very, again, ashamed because not that I don't hold him in any regard, but this is the thought process of a 14-year-old. I think that's the first time we were reading modern Indian history, and I remember so his name was very easy to memorize for the list of freedom fighters that we had to put down. I am not kidding, and that is exactly how I had remembered Sri Aurobindo Ghosh, because we used to, and from the era that he was in, I mean, there used to be some really heavy names back then, and that's the only context in which I knew his name, and I just happened, like, just in some one time to be googling or like going through Wikipedia, reading about that time. And when I clicked on his name and something like his page popped up, and that's when I discovered his shift to spirituality as well. So you're absolutely right. He has, and like a lot of the other freedom fighters from the earlier eras as well, have been woefully neglected by the education system. That is a fact that stands. But it's a very interesting idea that for the 150th birthday of Sri Aurobindo Ghosh is a very interesting book that's come out. What the next thing I wanted to ask both of you is, what led you to Sri Aurobindo ji? Let's put it that way. Because I mean, I get that Devdip, you went to the school over there, like as it's colloquially called the ashram school. But what was your first, if you recall, that is your first, let's say, how did you bump into Sri Aurobindo Ghosh's work in any way whatsoever, or what's the first memory of you? I mean, I don't want to use the phrase, but opening of your eyes, right, like to his work.
So, I mean, as Gautam mentioned, for me, I grew up very much in this atmosphere. So there were names that I was very familiar with, Sri Aurobindo and his spiritual associate, Mira Alfasa, whom we refer to as the mother. So that was very much the environment of my growing up. But the first time that I came across any serious text of his was entirely by coincidence. I was 12 years old, and I write about this in the conclusion of the book. I was 12 years old, and for Christmas, we have a tradition here of giving gifts and so on, and somebody gifted me, an adult, I don't know who, but I got this in my Christmas bag, so to say. There was a tiny booklet called The Philosophy of the Upanishads, written by Sri Aurobindo, and it was completely beyond me. I mean, it is still a very difficult text. But it was there in my sort of gift packet, if you want to call it. And when I was turning the pages, I said, "Oh my God, I don't understand anything, but it makes me feel very intelligent if I am reading this." And so I struggled with that book. I used to read line by line, and somewhere I had this conviction that if I can understand this, then I will become intelligent. But jokes apart, much later it was at the college level when I think, for me at least, the writings of Sri Aurobindo became more and more sort of directly relevant and very powerful. I had the privilege here at the ashram college. It's a college level, I should say, because it's an unconventional schooling system. It's an alternative system of education that we follow here. But at the college level, we had the possibility of taking up the various major works of Sri Aurobindo as subjects and to go deep into them. And so initially, starting with a few, I eventually read a number of them with very, very good teachers and professors. And these classes were more in the nature of discussions. We went deep into the ideas and the study of it. And for me, that was one of the highlights of my education here. And the result was that by the time I finished at the age of 2021, I had a fairly wide exposure, not deep, because that depth is something that comes over years of study, but there was a wide exposure to his writings. And I can say at least this much, that I recognized, fortunately, the tremendous value that they hold for me as an individual, but also for us as a nation and for humanity collectively. So that was kind of my entry into the writings of Sri Aurobindo. And subsequently, it so happened that I was also teaching in the two college students, and I continue to use many of those texts, and I engage with those writings over the last almost 20 years.
Oh, that's quite a journey. And what about you, Gautam? How did you stumble across, if it was stumbling in the first place?
So the first book that I read uh, of Sri Aurobindo's was given to me by a neighbor and now a friend. And it wasn't written by Sri Aurobindo. It was written by Satprem. I don't know if you know this, The Adventure of Consciousness. And as I began to read that book, it just blew my mind. And of course, once you start reading, you then want to read the original texts, and then from there the journey began into reading his original texts. And one by one, I began to read all of it. I think I've read about 30 out of the 36 volumes, maybe 32. But that was the starting point. The ideas, to use the word idea is very small. I think the consciousness that is there in those words, it presents itself to you in front of you. You feel a presence when you read Sri Aurobindo. And that presence comes in different ways. For instance, if you read his political writings, you stop slouching. Your back becomes straight. They are so inspiring. If you read his philosophical writings, your mind begins to understand the world much better, far more clearly, on the same issues that you may have read other philosophers, as I had earlier. And of course, while each and every word that he's written is spiritually imbued, the hard spiritual writings, for instance, Life Divine or Synthesis of Yoga, once you read them, it's like you travel across time, you travel across space within the confines of those words. I'm not even expressing this accurately right now. It's an experience everybody has to go through. Reading Sri Aurobindo is an experience. The way Devdip would read, let us say, the human cycle, and the way I would read human cycle, both of us in the same room at the same time, within the same time frame, our understanding of the human cycle would be different. Not only that, if I were to read human cycle today, my reading of my past year would be different. And that's because of, again, Sri Aurobindo's idea that man is constantly evolving. And as you evolve, you change your mind, you see new facts, you experience new things that happen. And accordingly, your understanding changes. So, to that extent, what people in a limited way call a classic, I think Sri Aurobindo is beyond. I don't have the vocabulary for it. Having said that, reading Sri Aurobindo is not easy, and you got to be very careful. How you start.
Right. So, Gautam, if you don't mind me asking, you mentioned that it was your neighbor who gifted you a copy of Adventure of the Consciousness. When was this? At what age was this? Because we know Devdip started quite young. I mean, even though at 12 is too young to be reading something that serious, but he had some level of exposure starting at a younger age. What about you? Was this a childhood event or was this into your adulthood?
I envy Devdeep so much because he was born into that consciousness. He was born into that atmosphere.
Right.
And he was born into, had somebody not given him the Upanishads, somebody else would have presented him with, let us say, essays divine and human or something. For me, I'm a complete outsider. I'm an intruder into Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo's world. I was 30.
Okay.
It took me 30 years before Sri Aurobindo found me.
No, and actually, the reason I asked that is because between the two of you, it's a very unique experience, right? Because exactly because of the fact that you pointed out, Devdip was born into that atmosphere where even though he might not have read the writings, people around him were
That's
practitioners,
right.
if I can put it in that sense, right? People who were who
At least
uh,
aspiring. Yeah.
aspiring practitioners, people who are aware of what, on a superficial level, at the very least, what Sri
No,
Aurobindo is trying to
allow me to correct you. I think it's a
Yes,
very
please.
matter of fact. For
Right.
Devdeep's family, who I now
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
Sri Aurobindo mother, they are people whom they have touched. The mother has
Right.
blessed his father. They have
Right.
worked with the mother, they have spoken to the mother.
Right.
It's that, and it's a very matter of fact way. I think it's like life itself. It's no big deal. Mother is there. You have a problem, she will solve it. That kind of faith that has developed not through a mental reading or a spiritual awakening or a sadhana, but
Right.
just as a matter of she's there. It's like a parent.
Right.
So that is what Devdeep has been born into. Me,
Okay.
I've been born into the dregs of Delhi, fighting away the outer world, the politics, the economics, and all that. So I just wanted to clarify: it's not just
Yes.
the word; it is
Right.
just a state of
The
being
atmosphere.
that you're very
Absolutely.
lucky to be
Yeah,
part of.
but having said that, Siddharth, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Gautam fully, and I try to be as sort of conscious, and I acknowledge the fact that I've had this opportunity and this occasion to grow in an atmosphere which is quite unique. Having said that, once whatever your starting point, at the end of the day, it is what you do with it. And
Absolutely.
so it is what you do with the knowledge and how much you are able to put it into practice. You can read a lot and not go very far, but definitely the reading and the atmosphere and all of these things are very powerful aids. So I just want to sort of add that little thing, that
No, no.
acknowledging whatever Gautam has said, ultimately
Right.
it's the aspiration of the individual. So Gautam may be in the dregs of Delhi or whatever else as he calls it, but by the sheer dint of his persistent quest, he's on his own journey regardless of whatever background we may come
Right.
from. So we've
Right.
had an interesting engagement, given that we come from different worlds, and Gautam highlights this in his introduction in the book, which is an interesting point that he makes.
Right. No, I absolutely agree that obviously it boils down to the persistence of the individual as to, and I mean, this goes beyond Sri Aurobindo ji, and it applies to most things in life, that you might read things or you might try to attend classes or do whatever about to gain knowledge on a certain thing, but unless you persist and implement it in your own life, or you try to push forward to make it a part of your life, it won't happen. My curiosity actually comes from the fact that it's very rare to find two people who have uh, two different perspectives in which they've studied the same, uh, let's say, I don't want to call it topic, but the same kind of material that you're studying, right? And Gautam, I mean, the way I look at it, you had a very different yet unique opportunity, right? You had this opportunity, as you call it, being born in the dregs of Delhi or living there and dealing with the politics, but at the same time being able to apply Sri Aurobindo's uh, advice or words into the real life, right? Into a world where there are people in front of you who aren't believers or practitioners, or people who haven't interacted with this philosophy, but you get to implement it in that life and see how it works out. So that's a very I would personally put it as a unique perspective, so that you could see uh, well, things that are happening to you because of the very
I think I
access
think
to the
I think
great
I
knowledge
think
you have.
the word you are looking for, and the word that expresses it very accurately, at least for me,
Hmm.
is blessing. I was
Yes.
just blessed. That it
Hmm.
just so happened.
Hmm.
And that slight touch that began with a small book
Hmm.
has now, of course, grown into another book already. But uh, it's a blessing to be part of Sri Aurobindo's consciousness.
Right.
And when you do read Sri Aurobindo, you do get into his consciousness.
Right.
And yeah, all this, physical neglect, academic neglect, intellectual neglect, political isolation, etc., are all they become meaningless once you enter this world of
Right.
Sri Aurobindo.
Right.
It's
You
a
know, Siddharth,
universe.
I just want
Sri
to.
Aurobindo is a universe, is a
Mm.
textual universe. And you enter this universe and the world changes. The universe changes. When you step out, you are a changed person.
Yeah. Right. Devdip, you had something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of reiterate and highlight what Gautam said right at the beginning of our discussion, that, all the 21 people who have written for the book, including us, we really come from very different backgrounds. And we wanted the book to feature as much diversity as possible. So, whether it's regard to men and women, um, academics, non academics, Indians, foreigners, young people, old people. So we didn't only go to people who have, who are experts for decades. We also tapped into some of the young scholars and others who are working with Sri Aurobindo's texts. And so one of the things that we want to show through the book is that he is somebody who is accessible to a wide variety of people in different professions, in different fields of life, different backgrounds. He does not write for a limited class of persons. Even his
Right.
most of his writings, I would say, it is not even necessary to be a devotee, in the sense of
Mhm.
an adherent. Not necessary. You can engage with his thoughts and with the what he presents, irrespective of how you feel as an adherent or not. It's really irrelevant. In fact, most of his writings came out in a journal called the Arya, which was not written for devotees. It was written for a much wider audience. And so that's one of the things that we want to highlight through our book, that there's a lot that people can take from Sri Aurobindo regardless of background.
Right. No, and you're right when you say that, because when I was just going through the book and reading it, something that I realized is it's very interesting when someone with, let's say, again, esoteric's not the correct word, but someone who has political, philosophical, or let's say theoretical thoughts, right, about things, also comes out with literature, right? Apart from translations, he has his own plays and stories and poems that he's written, which form an excellent gateway for, again, to carry forward your analogy, for non-devotees to kind of engage with a person's thought process, because try as you much, your fiction always reflects the thought process of its authors or the thinking that goes into it. So I fully agree. I mean, with someone with such a wide variety of work at his disposal, I think it becomes easier for masses to kind of gain access to him. It's a pity that people still haven't been able to, due to systematic failures, but that's a tale for some other time.
Siddharth, just to take and slightly digress from Devdeep's point,
Yeah.
uh, you don't need to be an adherent. You don't need to be believing in anything in order to read Sri Aurobindo. But the biggest returns that you can get from reading Sri Aurobindo is if you read him integrally, which is the integral yoga that he talks about, of which faith is an important aspect. So, karma and knowledge, of course, will help you get there as well. You can even approach him with cynicism,
Mhm.
and you will be transformed. But to get the best results out of reading Sri Aurobindo, I think you have to read him integrally. And if I may say so, and it may be a strange thought, you have to read him with your body, not just with your eyes. That presence is very much, it gives you an understanding which very often you cannot articulate through words, but that it sits in your being somewhere. So Devdeep, yeah, I agree. An adherent, you need not be an adherent or have faith in order to do this, but if you do, I think your understanding will magnify.
Gautam, I like the way that you put it once, the formulation that you gave once, that it's not with the hermeneutics of suspicion, but with the hermeneutics
Respect.
what, of respect. Yeah, of respect, of that mindset certainly opens the door much more.
Right.
Because he's a, I mean, if I can just digress for a minute, Siddharth, just think about the experience of this person, right? Here is a person born in India. He goes to the to England at a very young age. He has his entire education, pretty much his entire education there. He goes to Cambridge. He aces whatever he is studying at Cambridge. He refuses to join the Indian civil service, comes back. He joins the Maharaja of Baroda, and he is there for the next little over 10 years that he is there in Baroda, during which time he plunges into a study of Sanskrit, Gujarati, Bengali, and before that in England, in Cambridge, he has gone deep into Latin, Greek, English literature. He knows these languages very well, even German and even Italian. And then he comes in India. He's plunging into Indian thought and philosophy and culture. He takes up the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, Kalidasa, Vyasa, Mahabharata, Ramayana, all these texts. He has a thorough and deep entry into all of them. He launches into political action, right? So another sphere of his life where he is, taking up, leading this political action against the British, one of the first people to say boldly that no, we want full independence, there is no compromise with the colonizer, and we have the ability to forge a nation, we have the ability to rule ourselves. And then he has these remarkable experiences when he is in Alipur jail. He is imprisoned almost for a year, most of it in seclusion, and he has these incredible experiences. He continues the political work afterwards, and then follows the inner command to come away to Pondicherry. And he says later that now independence is guaranteed. I am certain it is coming. Political independence is guaranteed. It's a question of time. Others will take it forward. But there is a greater independence, a greater bondage of human nature that has to be addressed. And he gives the rest of his life, 40 years in Pondicherry, towards that. I mean, just think about the depth and diversity of that experience in one lifetime. And you kind of get a glimpse of what to expect when you read Sri Aurobindo. You get all these perspectives beautifully synthesized, integrated, and transformed by the principle of a spirituality in life. So it's quite an extraordinary, personality.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it in that particular description, I think it'll be, let's say, overwhelming to hear in itself that how can one man encompass so much, and
Yeah.
that in itself makes him a person whose works are worth reading. Just to take our discussion forward, I mean, I hesitate to kind of classify Sri Aurobindoji's works into fiction and non-fiction because it's much, much more than that. But personally, for both of you, which of his work, or maybe like a class of work, has stood out for you, maybe in terms of how it impacted you personally, or maybe in your professional life, or it helped you address a particular problem or a phase of life that you're going through? Because there are so many of his works, and I'm pretty sure you've engaged with all of them across different phases of your life. But has there been any particular work that stood out?
So for me, I think there are a few things that really touched me more than others, and it's also something that changes with the passage of time. So when I was in school, I remember reading some of his plays, which are very accessible to any student of literature. So there are these beautiful plays such as Perseus the Deliverer, which is based on a Greek story, but then he brings in all the classic elements of Sri Aurobindo into the play, and by that I mean there is aspiration for something higher. There is a change of consciousness. There is a faith in humanity. There is a faith in the possibility of growth and change. So that kind of was a very early introduction. I mentioned to you earlier about the philosophy of the Upanishads, which I tried to read but obviously couldn't when I was 12. But when I was much later in college, when I was 19, I read his commentaries on the Isha Upanishad, and that moved me very profoundly. It was a very powerful experience to read his commentaries on the Isha. The Isha Upanishad is a text which is just 18 verses, 18 shlokas, and he wrote multiple drafts of commentaries on the Isha. If you add up all the drafts, the book comes to something like 600 pages on those 18 verses. And even the draft commentaries are extraordinary. There is one of them which is a dialogue between a guru and a student who are discussing the Isha Upanishad, but using examples or using contemporary events like the French Revolution, um, modern English literature, and so on to explain the Isha Upanishad. So that was another text which was really fascinating for me. Um, then another series of essays which I liked very much were related to Indian culture. He responds to a critic of Indian culture, and he writes about the Renaissance in India and what he calls a defense of Indian culture. And he goes deep into Hinduism, religion, spirituality, Indian art, and he brings out the deeper values of those things in that particular volume. That text was very inspiring for me also, and it led eventually to more deep readings in the Gita, in the Vedas, in the Upanishads, and so on. And finally, I was asked to teach the social and political philosophy of Sri Aurobindo at the Ashram College. And so, though I had read those texts, I went much deeper into them when I actually started teaching them to undergrad students. And so that was another journey of discovery, which is ongoing. And that is again a very different Sri Aurobindo. It's the same, but it's cast in a different mold. He is
Right.
writing for a much more cosmopolitan audience. He's addressing problems of global interest, no longer just India specific or Indic culture and so on. So I would say these are some of the ones that have really touched me. And one last one which I'll mention is his sort of epic poem Savitri. Gautam will have a few things to say about Savitri, I guess. But for me, again, when I was very young, maybe 14 or 15, I was quite intrigued by this book. And again, it's a text which is not accessible in the normal way. It's a very profound and difficult text, full of symbolic meaning with a certain mantric quality. Like the sound, like poetry, when you read aloud, the sound has an effect on you. Savitri does that at a much profounder level. And so every day for years, I would read one page of Savitri in the evening.
Oh,
That
wow.
continued for at least almost 10 years. And so I went through the book multiple times as a result of that. So I was not reading it the way I would read a normal text. I would just read a page every day and stop. And that again had a very different effect, what Gautam referred to earlier in the sense of an atmosphere or consciousness of the book. So I think to summarize my answer to your question, I've engaged with each of these texts very differently. Sometimes much more academically, sometimes much more through the heart, sometimes much more the in terms of the effect it has on me in the way I see the world, and that is classic Sri Aurobindo, because he's really so global and universal that when you read him, you have the same kind of effect. It opens out all different directions in you.
Hmm. That's quite a detailed and interesting answer there, dude. Gautam, you want to add your narration to it?
Yeah. So among the first books that I picked up of Sri Aurobindo was his writings on the Mahabharata. It's a very thin book. And why I picked that up was because I am interested in the Mahabharata. I've been reading the Mahabharata as a child. I've read almost all the Mahabharats ever translated into English. I don't know Sanskrit, but at some point I will and read the original. So his perspective into the Mahabharata suddenly changed everything for me about the Mahabharata. In fact, I went back to reading the Mahabharata with that perspective in mind, and I saw a different Mahabharata emerge. Like Sri Aurobindo, Mahabharata also is a universe, it's a textual universe. You enter that universe and you become part of that universe. You take learnings from it. The entire Sanatan Dharma, all our darshanas, all our philosophical traditions, spiritual traditions, rituals, places of worship, everything is there in the Mahabharata. But when you read the Mahabharata, after reading on the Mahabharata by Sri Aurobindo, the Mahabharata you read gives you new insights, different insights. For me, that was definitely, and I go back to the Mahabharata every time. I'm on the Mahabharata is one of my favorite books. I've read them, read it several times. In fact, in the I'm not much of a Ramayana fan, But because on the Mahabharat, on the Mahabharat, Sri Aurobindo has talked about the two writing styles, the two poetic styles of Ved Vyas and Valmiki in a brilliant contrast. And I began to get interested in the Ramayana as well, although I haven't explored it the way I have explored the Mahabharata. The other book that I enjoy very much is a mother, and curiously, both the books that I enjoy very much are very small and thin books, small books. And in fact, chapter 4, particularly, which is where he talks about money, he says money is a force, money is a visible sign of a universal force. And just this one line can keep you going for an entire lifetime, trying to understand what this money is, how it, we know what it expresses itself through notes, through cowdies, through bank balances, cards, etc. But the force behind what it those are only the physical manifestations or digital manifestations. The force behind them is what Sri Aurobindo talks about in that chapter. You must read it. It's there, I think, volume 29 or something. I don't remember right now.
Gautam, you were the editor of Outlook Money when you read that, right?
That's right. Because I thought, let me see what he has written. I'm engaged with money. So let me see what Sri Aurobindo has written. It just came to me from the side. And when I read it, it changed a lot. It changed my perspective about money itself. And even till today, about government finances, international transactions, etc. There is, I see the manifestation, the theoretical anchoring that Sri Aurobindo has provided. Another chapter that I like very much is in essays in philosophy and yoga called the strength of stillness. It's a 3-page chapter, and in just that one chapter, I think he's encapsulated everything that needs to be said or understood about silence, about stillness in a world that is jumping from one point to the next all the time in search of meaning, in search of distraction, in search of entertainment, etc. That one chapter will ground you in ways that you never imagine. As far as Savitri goes, it's a book that I have never been able to read. I read a few lines and I get blissed out. I'm unable to go forward. The maximum that I may have read must be a quarter of a canto. Like Devdip reading one page a day for 10 years is news to me. But I don't know how he did it, because you can't read Savitri. It's very different, particularly from the dregs of Delhi. Savitri is the sublime heights, and getting there is extremely difficult, I must tell you this. Had Savitri been the first book I would have picked up, I may not have moved further on Sri Aurobindo's at all. So the books also choose you, by the way, Siddharth.
Absolutely, I
agree. The book you pick, it chooses to be picked.
Absolutely. Not just in the context of Sri Aurobindo ji, but like as a bibliophile, I completely agree. Like it's so I don't know if you follow Harry Potter, but it has the saying that the wand picks the wizard, not the other way around. And I think the same goes for books. Like when you walk into a bookstore, I think ever since I was a child, I've experienced that. So I completely agree that it's the book that picks the reader, not then the other way around.
So at different times, the political writings have influenced me. At other times, philosophical writings have grounded me, and the spiritual writings, of course, they are a different kind of writing, because the grammar is different, the vocabulary of Sri Aurobindo is different. This is where Sri Aurobindo brings out his entire thing. So those are probably, you should touch them at the end if you are beginning to read Sri Aurobindo. However, that has been my experience. Yours could be completely different. Devdip, he could start with Life Divine, although that's a big risk. But who knows?
Well, I know this for a fact that I'm going to be starting. Your book did its job really well. I have been thinking and pondering over which volume to pick up and where to start.
So where have you? What are the 3 likely volumes you're likely to pick up?
I have no idea, but I am thinking of actually I thought of picking up Savitri. I know since the moment I read your bit about you not being able to read it, I've been fascinated by just the idea of a book that is fundamentally so heavy for its but actually, I planned to do something similar to what Devdip did in his life. Like read, not maybe I might not end up doing it for 10 years, but I figured that it'd be a very interesting place to start off with. Um, but
So
I know
in
it's a
case
very bold choice.
it's a very brave choice, but in case you want to start with that, Devdeep, you should tell him what the mother said about how to read Savitri.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, that was one of the reasons why I read it that way, where she says like you read a little every day at a certain time, and not to use your mind too much in trying to understand mentally the words, but to try and allow the meaning to kind of imprint itself in you. And honestly, I mean, I really think that with a little habitual reading, you get into the rhythm of the text, and you start understanding the way in which Aurobindo is, sharing what he is in that book, because it's a spiritual autobiography of Sri Aurobindo. He's kind of recounting what he has done and what he has done within himself and what he's trying to do, as also the story of the mother's own experiences and life, but in a very, very symbolic way. So once you get that perspective and you read it, then you realize that, it's not a book that you can understand very rationally, and yet the mind adapts itself, tunes itself to the way that these profound messages are being conveyed, and it becomes very interesting. There are certainly, even after all the I have, even after having gone through the book a number of times, many passages that I just do not understand, but I don't even try to understand in that way. But there are many passages which are very inspiring, very beautiful, which you
Right.
clearly can make a sense of. And every reading that you do, you come back to those passages after maybe a year or two. And like Gautam said earlier, even with the other books of Sri Aurobindo, but especially with Savitri, new layers reveal themselves. Your understanding deepens, you grow with it. So it's like it's a reading which, when Gautam said to try and read integrally, it's like when you're reading, it's not just your mental comprehension that is engaged, but it also changes the way you see yourself, the way you see the world, the way you understand things, the way you relate to it. It's quite fascinating. So it's really an adventure. That's why we often say reading Sri Aurobindo is an adventure, and we really mean it in that sense, because he's through words, he's drawing you through worlds which are extraordinary.
Right.
He draws the month. It's a mantric book, and you have to understand the music of Savitri. And I'll just illustrate it. I'm reading Richard's chapter. I'm just picked up a random line.
Right. Right.
The Savitri, the book is in the other room, so I don't want to break this. So this is an iambic pentameter, and let me express it to you musically.
Sure.
So the all the verses are in a iambic pentameter in meters of 10. So the woman first affronted the abyss, daring to journey through the eternal night, a curtain of impenetrable dead. The darkness hung around her cage of sense. You understand? So
Right.
this rhythm. Once you get into the reading Savitri, this
Right.
rhythm comes, and
Right.
it comes unconsciously. You
Right.
don't. I'm just giving you a kunji, simplifying the text for you. But there is this this musicality. There is a rhythm, and
Right.
that is there throughout this book, throughout this those it's a thick book. And
Right.
if you are venturing on this adventure, we wish you all the very best, because this is the pinnacle of Sri Aurobindo. This is his final uh, climactic expression. He has honed it 7 times, Devdi.
No, well, some passages he rewrote 50 times.
3 times. So this is a perfection of Sri Aurobindo.
Yeah, and he
And
said that at each time that he was able to rise to a higher level of seeing or being, he was able to rewrite those passages with that consciousness. So he was also like working while writing, he was also using that as a medium to see how much he can bring of his realization and his experience into written form. So, quite fascinating. So, the work becomes a kind of record of his own yoga.
Right. No, I think I'm going to take up this adventure, and I'm glad that you have given me this short, let's say, word of caution and encouragement at the same time for before I read this. And not to go there, but Gautam, I think I could see the dregs of Delhi when you mentioned Kunji. Like, I've studied in Delhi for 5 years. The moment you mentioned the word Kunji, that it's the Delhi in you speaking that popped out. Well, this has been great, gentlemen, but unfortunately, we are towards the end of our podcast. We're running out of time. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was a fascinating conversation, really an eye opener. And in fact, to all my listeners and viewers, I would recommend that you, as both of them very succinctly put it, read this bridge to one of the most fascinating personalities from the previous century in India, whose works cover practically everything that you can think of and has clearly much more depth than any one of us can fathom. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Siddharth. Pleasure
Thank you,
being here.
Siddharth. Pleasure talking to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, check us out on Instagram, YouTube, and all other social medias with the same name, Kitabi Karwan. We post delightful stuff about books, opinions, reviews, posts, book club meetings, a lot of other things happen on all our social media pages. We would love to hear your feedback on the podcast, or if you have some suggestions to have authors or editors, translators, anyone association with the world of books on our podcast, do pass it on to us. We'd love to have them. Thank you so much for joining in. And as the cliche goes, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.